The autumn air was crisp that afternoon, but I barely felt it. My thoughts swirled too violently, an endless storm I could never outrun. To everyone else, I was Caleb Miller, pastor's son, small-town golden boy who never strayed from the path of righteousness. But beneath their smiles and pats on the back, I carried a secret that clung to me like wet clothes. I was queer. And in this family, in this world, that was enough to make someone vanish. I passed by the church on my way home, the steeple piercing the sky like a warning. My stomach tightened. Dad had just raged through another sermon about the sin of same-sex relationships, his hands clenched into fists at the pulpit. Yet my chest ached, craving the approval of this man who prayed over me each night, not knowing what he'd condemn if he truly saw me. Weaving through the back alleys, I approached a nondescript building with a rainbow flag taped to the window. Inside, a gay-affirming youth group shared cookies, laughter, and threads of hope. It was my sanctuary, the one place I could exhale, even if my heart beat so hard it hurt. The walls hummed with quiet courage, words of acceptance and solidarity floating between faces that glowed with something foreign. Self-love. I wanted to bottle it, to carry it home and breathe it when despair sank its claws into me. That night, after sneaking back into the house, my parents' voices struck like shrapnel from the living room. My father's tone was sharp, cutting apart anything outside his worldview. LGBTQ plus rights? Sin against God. Every word chipped away at the fragile self I'd built in that support group. Did he know? Could he sense it in me? In my room, the quiet was unbearable. Tears spilled before I could stop them, staining my pillow. Shame spiraled, coiling tighter until I couldn't breathe. God, why did you make me like this? I whispered into the dark. The question lingered, looping through my mind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Pain bloomed in my chest, not emotional, but physical, a sharp, crushing weight. Then, a deep stillness. Panic turned to nothingness. My heart, I realized, wasn't beating. My last thought as the world dissolved was whether death might be easier than living in this unbearable in-between. The weight on my chest was unbearable, pressing down like a boulder. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Darkness stretched in every direction. My body felt distant, as if I existed outside of it, watching from somewhere else. The air was thick with silence, except for the faintest sound, my mother's voice, trembling. "Caleb? Caleb, wake up!" Then a rush, a jolt of something electric tearing me from that suffocating void. My eyelids fluttered, and I gasped, foreign air filling my lungs like I'd been drowning. The world rushed back in flashes, bright overhead lights, my father's rigid expression, my mother's tear-streaked face hovering above me. The pain in her eyes gutted me. But behind her, my father stood stiff, arms crossed, mouth set in something indistinguishable, something colder than I was prepared to face. "What?" My voice cracked. My limbs felt weak, like they weren't mine anymore. "You collapsed," my mother whispered, cradling my face. "We thought we lost you." My father didn't speak. He simply studied me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Paramedics are on the way," she added, brushing damp hair from my forehead. "Caleb, you scared us." Scared them. That's what I did, wasn't it? I had always been something for them to fear, something unnatural, something sinful. I wanted to tell her how heavy it all was, the weight of her love and his judgment, the way they crushed me from both sides, the way I thought for a moment it would be better if I disappeared completely. But I said nothing. Sirens wailed in the distance. My mother prayed softly under her breath, pleading for my life as if she hadn't realized I was already losing it long before I collapsed. My father turned, pacing near the doorway, jaw tight. Then he muttered, "This wouldn't have happened if you weren't rebelling against God." The air was sucked from the room. and something sharp splintered inside me. My mother flinched but didn't contradict him. She clutched my hand tighter, as if it would make up for the dagger planted between us all. I swallowed hard, throat raw. Somewhere in that moment I realised dying hadn't scared me, but living, while carrying this truth, still did. The room blurred, melting into something distant, unreal. A strange pressure lifted from my chest, and suddenly I wasn't there, not in the bed, not in my body. I hovered, weightless above it all. Below me, my mother clung to my hand, rocking back and forth, her lips forming frantic prayers. My father stood rigid, arms crossed, face carved from stone. The paramedics burst in, shattering the thick silence with instructions and beeping machines. I should have felt panic, but there was only stillness. I was floating, untethered, watching it unfold like a scene from someone else's life. Then, a shift, a pull. A warmth, soft but unstoppable, tugged me away from the room. The world folded, stretching into something vast and endless. Colours bled into each other, shades I had no name for swirling in the periphery of my vision. I turned, or maybe I just willed myself to. And there it was. A light, not harsh or blinding, but radiant, like the warmth of the sun through autumn leaves. It pulsed, alive, beckoning me closer. I hesitated. Wasn't this it? The end? The part where I was judged, condemned, cast away? And yet, there was no fear here, no shame, just love. I floated toward it, drawn by an ache I hadn't realised was there, a longing deeper than anything I'd ever known. Then a whisper, not with words, but with something older, something truer. Come, Caleb. Tears blurred my vision. A presence surrounded me, enveloping every shattered, broken part of myself. My father's words, my own self-loathing, every whispered prayer begging to be anyone but who I was. It all melted away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wrong. I wasn't a mistake. I simply was. A hand, luminous and warm, extended toward me. And just as I reached for it, a jolt. Pain slammed through me, wrenching me back. Hands pressed on my chest. My mother's sobs filled the air. I gasped as my body reclaimed me, the weight of the world slamming back into place. I was alive, but I had seen something, and nothing would ever be the same again. The light drew closer, bathing me in a warmth that felt like honey spreading through every fracture in my soul. I drifted toward it, shivering, not with fear, but with something that hovered between relief and awe. The pull was gentle, yet irresistible, like the tender insistence of a hand taking yours. Every step, if I could call the sensation of gliding weightlessly steps, peeled away the layers of shame that had been stitched to my skin. Then came the voices. Soft at first, distant murmurs, then growing clearer. They rose and fell like the ebb of waves, each tone familiar and steeped in memory. My grandmother, her laugh rich and full. My childhood best friend Jacob, whose absence at 12 had called death's permanence into sharp focus. Caleb, they said, not in disappointment or pity, but joy. The kind of joy you hear when someone says your name, like coming home. Tears blurred my vision, though I wasn't sure if I still had eyes or tears to cry. Am I dead? My voice wavered, small in the vast radiance. No, came the reply. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was a knowing, one that settled somewhere deep, filling the gaps self-loathing had carved into me. The light pulsed, as if nodding. More figures emerged, indistinct and shimmering, yet undeniably present. Jacob stood among them, his freckled face free of illness, his eyes bright. His smile was endless and safe. Jacob! My breath hitched, but he only nodded like he'd been waiting. More voices joined, each one unwinding the isolation that had strangled me for years. I wanted to stop, to stay cocooned in this tapestry of love and familiarity, but the light, patient and constant, beckoned me onward. As I moved closer, its warmth grew, wrapping itself around the ragged pieces of me. I thought of everything I'd done, everything I was. Would this be where I was judged, cast down? Instead, the light spoke again without words. You are loved, just as you are. The weight of that truth staggered me, more solid than my father's frowns or every cutting sermon I'd endured. I wanted to cry, to thank the light, to ask it why, but something deeper cried, "Be still." So I surrendered, stepping further into its embrace. The warmth deepened, wrapping around me like an embrace I had spent my whole life aching for. The light pulsed, gentle and knowing. Then, from within its radiance, a figure emerged, tall, luminous, neither male nor female. Their presence exuded something beyond words: peace, understanding, love. "Caleb," they said, though their voice wasn't a sound but a vibration in my very being, "you are safe." Tears welled in my eyes. Safe. A word I had never truly felt, not in my father's house, not beneath the weight of expectations that smothered me. Am I dead? My own voice quivered. The being smiled, warmth itself. "Not yet, but you are here to understand." A flicker of doubt surfaced. What if this was a trick? What if judgment loomed just beyond the light? But the being, my guide, I realized, seemed to sense my fear. They lifted a hand, and suddenly images swirled around me. Not memories, but truths. A boy praying, his hands clenched, begging God to make him right. The same boy, older now, standing in the pews, swallowing down the ache as his father preached against him without even knowing. Then the boy, in his bedroom, curled on his side, whispering, "Why did you make me like this?" I gasped. These were my own reflections, held up like a mirror to my soul. The guide reached for me. "Caleb, there was never a mistake in your making." The words struck something deep, something raw. "But my father," he says, "the voices of man are not the voice of divine love." A sob wrenched free. Shame pouring out of me like floodwaters breaching a dam. "You are not broken," the guide whispered. "You are exactly as you were meant to be." Something inside me cracked open, something buried beneath layers of guilt and fear. For the first time, I believed it might be true. The guide's presence pulsed with warmth as I stood within the radiant expanse. Their eyes, if they even had eyes, held infinite understanding. "You've been told heaven is for the righteous," they said, their voice like a breeze through golden fields. But righteousness was never about perfection. It was always about love. The space around us shifted, unfolding like the turning of a page. Before me stretched a breathtaking city, not of golden streets or towering gates, but something more alive, more real. Colours beyond earthly comprehension shimmered in the sky, and a harmonious hum reverberated through everything, as if the universe itself was singing. People walked freely, laughing, embracing, existing. Some gleamed with crescent moons on their foreheads, others shone like stardust. Among them, 2 men sat hand in hand beneath a flowering tree, their foreheads pressed together, love radiating between them without hesitation. Nearby, a woman with soft eyes placed a kiss upon her wife's forehead, their forms glowing brighter as they held each other. I couldn't breathe, not from fear, but from awe. This was heaven. And my entire life, I had been told there was no place for people like them, like me, here. My voice trembled. "But my father always said—" The guide gently placed a hand over my heart, and in an instant, The weight I had carried for years, the shame, the self-loathing, cracked apart like fragile glass. "Your father spoke from fear," they murmured. "Fear taught from generations of misunderstanding. But love, true love, rejects fear." Tears pricked my eyes. "Then, God doesn't hate me?" A wave of warmth cascaded over me, wrapping around every aching corner of my soul. The guide smiled. "God never has." The words unravelled something deep within me, something knotted tight since childhood. My breath hitched, and for the first time I allowed myself to believe it. I was not broken. I was not an abomination. I was home. A shift in the air, a sudden absence of warmth. The luminous world around me blurred, melting into something darker, vast and empty, yet pressing down on my chest like unseen hands. I staggered back. The guide remained silent, their glow dulled as I turned, drawn toward the abyss ahead. Whispers curled through the void like smoke. Shapes moved in the darkness, their forms undefined but writhing, tormented. A voice rose above the others, my own. "You will never be enough, Star." My breath caught in my throat. The words echoed, not just here, but from every mirror I had avoided, every silent prayer I had dared to whisper. A jagged sob ripped through me. "This place," I whispered, my voice shaking. "What is this?" The guide's reply was gentle. "A reflection." "Of what? Of me?" The thought sent a cold spike through my gut. In the swirling blackness I saw it, a version of myself, hollow-eyed, hunched beneath the weight of invisible chains. His skin was bruised with the shape of every hateful word I'd believed. I lurched forward, but my hand passed through the figure. He wasn't trapped by the darkness. He was the darkness. "Why?" My question was barely a whisper. "It is not God who binds you here," the guide said softly. "It is fear." The word struck like a stone. The figures in the void, none were forced to stay. They clung to their pain, unwilling or unable to let it go. I felt the weight of my own shame, my father's words tethered to me like iron shackles. If I stayed here, I knew I would never leave. The guide extended a hand. "You do not belong in the dark, Caleb. The light is still yours to claim." My pulse roared in my ears. To stay meant safety in suffering. To leave meant truth. I took a breath. Then, as if wrenching myself from the grip of my own shadow, I stepped away from the darkness, toward love, toward myself. The light found me again, and I let it in. The darkness receded, replaced by an overwhelming presence, not an image, not a sound, but love. So vast and infinite that it pressed into every fracture in my being. I trembled, weightless before it. Then a voice, not loud, but everywhere. "Caleb Starr." It was nothing like my father's voice. No judgment, no condemnation, only warmth, deep as the earth itself. Tears blurred my vision. "Am I—" My voice cracked. "Am I supposed to be here?" A pause. Then, gentle and certain. "You have always been meant to be, exactly as you are." Star, a sob wrenched from my chest. "But my father, the church, they said people like me, that we couldn't." Pain surged through me. Years of whispered prayers begging to be someone else. Years of believing I was somehow wrong. "They were wrong." Star. A rush of light filled me, sinking deep into the wounds I never thought could heal. I shook my head, disbelieving. "Then why did you make me like this? If love is supposed to be good, why did you let me suffer?" Love wrapped around me, not as an answer, but as an understanding. Because your truth will open doors for others still trapped in the dark. "You must go back, Caleb." Star panic flared. "No, I can't." The thought of returning to the small, suffocating town, my father's eyes filled with something unreadable, made my chest tighten. What if they never accept me? Their acceptance is not your burden to bear. You are already accepted. Star. The warmth deepened, pressing into the very core of me, filling the spaces I had left empty for so long. Love does not ask you to shrink. The light pulsed, and I knew I was being sent back. Tears streaked my face. But I don't want to forget this. Forget you. A quiet promise, strong as the dawn. You won't, Star. Then, a pull, harsh, sudden. The light fractured, retreating. Cold rushed in, and just before I slammed back into my body, back into a world that might never understand me, the voice whispered, "Be who I made you to be." Star. The first thing I felt was weight, pressing, suffocating, inescapable. My body, once untethered and free, was now leaden with sensation. A sharp inhale scorched my lungs, cold air filling the spaces that had once pulsed with divine warmth. Noise followed, a beeping monitor, hushed voices, my mother's whisper, frantic prayers spilling from her lips. My father stood stiff at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, eyes dark with something unspoken. I had returned. The absence of the light, the love, was instant. A hollow ache where it had been wrapped itself around me, leaving me colder than before. My mother gasped as my eyelids fluttered. "Caleb!" "Oh, thank God!" she sobbed, clutching my hand too tightly, as if afraid I'd slip away again. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my voice a whisper. "I saw—" My father stepped forward, his presence colder than any void. "You were given another chance," he said, his voice even but sharp. "I hope you understand that now." The words hit harder than they should have. He thought this was a warning, a message that I had been spared despite myself. But I knew the truth. I had seen heaven, and people like me belonged there. Tears burned the edges of my vision, not from pain, but from the unbearable knowledge of what I had to do next. "I saw something," I croaked, dragging my gaze to my father's. His eyes flickered, uncertain. "I need to tell you. Tell everyone." A deep crease formed between his brows. "Tell us what?" My fingers trembled beneath my mother's grip. "God doesn't hate me. God never did." A beat of silence. Then my father's jaw tightened. "Caleb, you're weak. You were dreaming." But it wasn't a dream. It had been real. More real than this fluorescent-lit hospital room. More real than my father's fear wrapped in the disguise of devotion. I had felt it. I swallowed hard, my breath shaky but sure. It wasn't a dream. I had come back different, and nothing would ever be the same again. Eli's fingers tightened around his coffee cup, his gaze darting between me and the worn table between us. The cafe hummed with quiet conversations, but the thickness in the air between us was undeniable. "You died," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "And you're telling me that heaven, God, wasn't like what we were taught?" I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling against the ceramic mug. "It wasn't just different, Eli. It was love. No conditions, no exclusions. People like us. We were there. We belonged." Eli's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "That's impossible." "No, it's not." I leaned forward. "You don't have to be afraid, Eli. I saw it with my own eyes. God never hated us." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I want to believe you. I swear I do." His voice cracked. "But if you're right, if all of this is true, that means we've spent our whole lives afraid of something that never existed." The realization settled between us like a weight. His eyes glistened, and for a moment I thought he might bolt. Instead, He let out a shuddering breath and gave the smallest of nods. Something shifted. Telling him was the first step. The next came at church. I stood outside during Sunday service, heart a drum in my chest, waiting for the congregation to spill onto the steps. My father's voice boomed inside, preaching the same tired message, but it no longer held any power over me. My truth burned in my chest, and I was ready. As the doors opened and familiar faces flooded out, I took a breath and spoke. I died. My voice carried, stopping a few people in their tracks. And I saw heaven. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. My father pushed forward, face dark with fury. Caleb, enough. But I wasn't afraid anymore. My gaze swept over them. People I had known my entire life, faces filled with doubt, curiosity, even fear. And then, steady, unwavering, I said, Heaven is love, and love doesn't exclude people like me. A hush fell over the crowd. The first door had been opened, and I wouldn't stop until the rest followed. The sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows on the church floor as I stood before the congregation. My palms were damp, my heart rattling like a bird in a cage, but I steadied myself. This was my moment. I died, I began, my voice trembling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father loomed at the back, his arms crossed, his glare burning into me. I pushed past the fear, and I saw heaven. The silence deepened, thick with curiosity and suspicion. My breath caught, but then I remembered the warmth of the light, the truth I had carried back. That truth couldn't be silenced, not anymore. I saw a place filled with love, I continued. Not the conditional kind we've been taught, but pure, endless, divine love. And I saw people like me, the ones you've been told don't belong. They do. We do. Murmurs spread, disbelieving whispers and quiet prayers. I locked eyes with Eli, standing near the edge of the crowd, his clenched fists the only sign of his inner turmoil. I hoped my words would crack the walls around him too. God doesn't hate me, he never did, and he doesn't hate any of us. It's not love that excludes, it's fear. My father finally stepped forward, his voice sharp and cutting. Enough of this blasphemy, Caleb. You're confusing these people. You're lost. I turned to him, fear loosening its grip on me. No, Dad. For the first time, I'm found, and I'll say it as many times as I need to, for everyone here drowning in the lies I once believed. God made me as I am, and he loves me just as I am. My voice grew steadier with each word, until even my father fell silent, his mouth tightening as if holding back something I couldn't name. My mother's gaze brimmed with tears, though I could not tell if they stemmed from pain or hope. I faced the crowd one last time, my voice soft but unshakable. Love is the only thing we're judged by, so let it in. As I walked away, I heard someone clap, then another. Slowly, applause spread, hope flickering in the cracks of disbelief. God will guide you, but I promise you this. It's worth it. If you've been touched by my story, if you felt a stirring in your heart, I encourage you to seek Jesus. Open your heart to him, and he will meet you where you are. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you'd like to share your thoughts or ask for prayer, please leave your name in the comments below. And if you're curious to hear more stories like mine, check out the videos on your screen now. Each one is a testament to the power of faith, grace, and God's unending love.